right, let's check that we're live. We should be. Just let a few people trickle in before we get the introductions started. Let's see, Facebook. See that we not yet on YouTube. Those delays.
Yeah, it's showing up now.
Okay, there we go. Now we're gonna share it in our group. We want to get more. We already got 4 people. All right. Thank you, people, for joining. Let's share this in the LoudEgg group. That way we make it official. Because, some people don't want to join the page. They got to be in the group.
Right.
All right. Hopefully I did that right. We'll see how that goes. All right. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody in the world who's joining this Concord live session about data privacy, and joined by my partner in crime, my buddy Anil Agrawal, and the founder of Concord, Dash Lavine. Thanks, guys, for doing this, making some time on the late evening in New York. And then I guess you guys are on the other side of the country, a little bit evening, but not as late, right?
Right.
So
Glad to be here.
yeah,
glad to be here as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So Dash, I guess we could start with you, since Concord's your baby, right? A little bit about yourself. People are interested in knowing founders a bit. You don't have to give too much away. Just where you're from, and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so Dash Lavine, founder and CEO of Concord. So I've been enterprise software for quite a while. So I used to work for a company called Web Trends for a number of years. We're one of the 3 big analytics companies in the space. It was us and Google and Adobe who bought Omniture as well. And so we ultimately sold that company to Oracle back in 2017. I used to run sales and services for that company for a little over a decade. And back in about 2014 kind of era, I started creating what I called codename control at the time, which was basically an architecture brief around how we could potentially fix privacy and control of data and those types of things. And it ultimately came from that space where we worked with a lot of large companies to collect a lot of data on people. And part of that job was kind of letting people not know all the stuff that we were collecting, if you will. And so I knew that something was likely coming to a head. And this is a number of years later. GDPR, of course, came down the pipe, and then some other privacy regulations. But we'd already been working on kind of an early framing for what Concord became. And it was really just around that idea, which there had to be a better way to kind of control and, build trust with people, right? So control for people, and then the ability to build trust between yourself as a brand and then those people that you're working with, either as customers or potential prospects. And so that's really what our mission is about, is making sure that you're able to build that trust layer. And ultimately, we really believe this, that the better trust that you build with people, the greater growth you can get over time. And so that's really what all of our solutions are built around. So it's not just compliance, it's also really creating a trust layer between you and other individuals that you want to be part of your mission and your story, and making sure that you're able to do the right things with those folks by, giving them some level of control and ultimately building that trust so that they're willing to work with you, which we think is, I think, even more of a need in today's AI kind of driven market as well.
Absolutely, especially with AI, and then even with the SEO end of things, with the EAT signals that you do want that trust factor. So a tool and a platform like Concord will actually help a website earn that trust, okay, get that trust going, correct? Like that's what's basically built for.
Yeah, it's one of the differences. I'll show it a bit when we go through the demo, but one of the differences we do versus some of the other compliance vendors is, of course, we're checking all the compliance boxes. That's a baseline requirement, right? So we're there to do that. But we really believe in that idea of kind of that trust and transparency component being a core part of it. And we think experience matters a lot there, right? Ultimately, what experience are you delivering to people, and how does that ultimately build that trust layer between you and them? And so one thing we do within our unified privacy center is that we build a few additional things in there versus some of the other kind of consent banners that you typically see. And so that includes things like the ability to submit those privacy requests, which are also required by regulation, but are often in separate experiences. So often you'll have different forms that you have that are either hosted or you have to build something yourself, and then people need to go do that. We build that within the same experience. And then some additional stuff around the different types of terms and conditions, policies that you have. We expose that within it. And then we also show consent history to individuals. And you can, of course, turn any of these things on or off if you'd like, but we believe that's kind of the best set of options to have available, is give people the ability to see what they have consented to and haven't, and ultimately allow them to really trust in you as a brand. Because of that, yeah, explosion, as we were talking about a bit around AI and like different sites and the ability to build out tech in a little more easy way today than you used to be able to. And so because of that, it's even harder to earn trust with individuals, right? They don't know who you are.
Yeah. Is it more pressure on you that you built a platform based on trust? Do you feel like, you're like the basis for the trust factor? And now, do you have a lot of questions like, hey, wait, how can we trust you to handle our data? You're doing the trust part. You're handling the middleman, but do you feel more pressure in that sense? I don't know if that's right. Not pressure, but like,
that's a good question. There's definitely, I think there's definitely some of that. I think we actually get some benefit from the fact that we are a trust and compliance company, right? And that people inherently kind of trust in that nature. But we definitely do a lot of stuff behind the scenes to kind of ease those concerns if they exist, because that definitely exists with companies. It's one of the reasons our solution exists, is to make those things more transparent so people know a little bit more about what you're doing with information and their data specifically. But we definitely do stuff behind the scenes for our different brand partners to make sure that they trust in our solution.
To keep it within house for their stuff. Yeah.
Totally.
I mean, it's not like you're just building like a image AI tool. It's like, hey, that's fun. Who cares? You're actually the foundation of the trust tool. So and having client websites, be more, trustful.
Yeah, there's definitely, and there's a bare minimum there, right? So like to really kind of be in this space, that's why there's not as many vendors, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that you have to do, and especially do it correctly, right? And there are certain vendors that will struggle with some parts of it, like especially the compliance around script and iframes and cookies and how those things relate, and ultimately what you block and when you block those things. So we do a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure that we're fully compliant when it comes to those components. There are definitely some lighter weight tools that don't necessarily do that correctly, right? They may not block a script
I think I've used those tools. I think Anil and myself probably have used those. I mean, and also with I think why myself, I haven't dove in deeper into a tool like Concord is knowing all the laws and the regulations. It's even state by state. In the United States, I think it's different. And then you have Europe with a whole different ball game. So I guess for your clients, you have to kind of, you have the availability to deal with their situations from their country, their areas.
Yeah, we do. So a couple things on that front. So we do full regional support. So we do kind of real-time identification of the users when they hit your site. And then we can show different experiences based on the region. And that's down to, things like state level. So we do try and make it as simple as possible. We know that this stuff is not easy to understand, right? And so it's like, that's one of the things we our goal is to solve for most folks too. It's also one of the reasons we're, we did the AppSumo and lifetime deal launch, is to kind of get it down to the hands of smaller businesses that often can't afford the larger, more expensive solutions that we compete with typically, like OneTrust and some of those. And so one of the things that we're working on as part of this and our experience with all of you is basically to refine those onboarding experiences, make them simpler, easier to understand. In the past, like our solution we've been running for a while was very built around kind of enterprise level experiences. And in those scenarios, often we would do the configuration. There wasn't need for as slick of onboarding experiences and whatnot. So we needed like all the dirty kind of underlying configuration options. And we've always had those exposed within the UI itself. But in terms of actually doing that in an easy way, right, we're always continuing to refine that, and that's where this particular campaign has been pretty helpful for us already, right? We've got a lot of great feedback from a lot of different users on how we could potentially improve certain experiences there, and including both of you as well. So
you got to make it dummy proof for me. I know Anil has already done a great video about Concord. He's probably much more advanced. He's more familiar with a tool like this. That's why I was glad he came on to help with this session, because it definitely, when it first came to Concord showed up on AppSumo. I think, Anil, you messaged me right away on Facebook, and you're like, hey, you check out Concord yet? I'm like, I don't know if I need this. Well, what is this about? Data privacy? I'm freaking out already. Do I have to read a book? Like, and then he talked to me a little bit more about it, did a video, and then I spoke with you, Dash. Of course, you've been really helpful, and that's why I'm excited about this session. I think for myself personally, and whoever shows up to watch, great for everybody, But Anil, you've had some experience with this tool,
Yeah,
right?
in the beginning, I was actually I remember, maybe Dash, you remember, like one of my initial comments were a little bit on skeptical side. I was asking like, what is this? And especially when it came to data systems, and obviously Dash is going to talk about data systems, because data systems is like, it's such a generic term, and I thought like, what is it? Because all I know is like, okay, apps and services and whatever that you're using for your websites, and I hadn't heard that term, and I wanted to make sure that it's not something that we have to dig deep in, and it turns out actually you don't have to. It's pretty much similar stuff that we have seen with other apps. So yeah. So then I started digging really deep, and I actually had a demo with Dash, and that helped a lot. So thanks for that, for sure.
Dash, are you doing demos with a lot of users, or is it do you send out a link automatically when someone purchases, or no, they make an appointment with you through a process? How does that
Yeah,
work?
usually just appointments. So yeah, and we're always looking to kind of refine our materials to have self-service stuff there. So we're working on some new videos and kind of self-serve content as well on the marketing side. But yeah, I've definitely offered up kind of meetings to the customers that have signed up, including kind of just book something on my calendar that works for you. So I've definitely been doing a number of those each week for sure. And so yeah, I think lots of great feedback from all the users that have signed up so far. We've had quite a few signups, even though there's not a lot of reviews or anything on AppSumo. We have had a lot of customers sign up.
Don't worry. That's always, you don't always need a lot of reviews. You can't go by that. There's a lot of hidden gems. But how big is your team? Is it small?
So we have roughly kind of 20 people in the mix.
Wow.
And so a mix of full-time and part-time. A lot of folks that kind of either worked with me or for me in the past as well. So we do have a pretty senior team. Most of our folks have been in tech and software for a lot of years. We have a pretty key advisory team as well. So yeah, lots of folks that have had larger exits and good scenarios, including a lot of our angel investors and some of the venture investors. So we do have a mix of folks on that front between angels and then like venture firms like RGA Ventures and whatnot that are backing what we're doing. And so some of our stuff has been a little slow rolled. As I mentioned, you have to like check all these different boxes to ensure that you have, what you need to kind of meet all the baseline requirements on the compliance side. But there's also other stuff that we'll be doing in the future state that's pretty interesting, that's tied to not just the kind of core compliance requirements, but even things like classification of data itself, so that you know how it can be used downstream in different types of systems, which is a common challenge now with AI, especially, right? You want to make sure that data is classified, not just based around consent at the individual user level, but also permitted use cases, which is a big part of some of the AI regulation that's coming down the pipe.
See a comment, from Faz about Anil is a little
bit
lower.
For Faz. I lowered the whole monitor.
We also did not plan this, Anil and myself. Yeah. We're both wearing the same, we're on the same team.
Dash showed up. The Dash's t-shirt is going to be black, just like their website. So it's a dark mode that
we love your shirt. Dash, love your shirt. It's an awesome shirt, privacy. I mean, but we did not coordinate this. We should have all worn privacy, or I should have been like a thief, with a thief shirt, like bandit, black hat, and you could have been a pirate.
And I could have like a compliance.
Yes, your compliance, we needed to balance this out. But I guess a lot of people are actually want to get under the hood of this thing. So if you, Dash, if you want to share your screen whenever you're ready, or, hey,
let's do it.
It's your show.
Yeah,
we're just along for the ride. I just, want to keep up.
Yes, I shared there. Let me know once we're good to go.
Oh, yeah. Let's see if that works. All right. I think everybody should be able to see the screen now.
Perfect. Yeah, so let's dive in. What I'll do first, I think, is just talk through kind of our high-level approach and how we break out the different features that we focus on. So the first piece is consent management. And so this is ultimately kind of the cookie consent stuff, but also there's a little more to that than that with some of the customers we work with. So we also support what we call universal consent. Really, the idea is in addition to standard cookie consent, you can also capture consent for other types of key actions. Examples of those would be someone accepting terms of service or opting into something like email marketing. So we do have pretty robust APIs behind the scenes that can be used for that. It's also why we have some other areas that are more in the advanced settings within the product for doing things like custom scripts. And so we provide that. It's kind of like, think about it like a little bit of a lightweight tag manager so that you could basically do things like capture those types of consent events. So we have a pretty robust site client library, and then that goes along with those APIs as well. So I won't go into a lot of detail there, but if you have any questions around how to do those types of specific things, we do have some good docs on it, but also if you need help, you can always reach out to our team on that front. But yeah, that's the first piece, which is basic consent across both the banner stuff that we capture and then any type of other consent, as I mentioned. When it comes to the stuff that we do automatically, which is the majority of stuff that people typically need, we basically scan in real time. This is a little different than some of the other solutions. So other solutions out there will often have scheduled scans built into the pricing models and or plans. We basically believe that you have to scan in real time so nothing falls between the cracks. And that basically includes capturing different types of items. So not just cookies, but also scripts and iframes, which is very key to what you need to do here. That's where I mentioned some of the other solutions that sometimes fall down there. It's because they're not fully capturing scripts and iframes, especially. Often those are the things that set the cookies. So you really need to block those in addition to just deleting cookies, because they'll just continue to reset the cookies. And so that's not compliant with GDPR as an example, if anything gets set, even if you delete it right away. So we definitely put in a lot of work into the engine that goes into basically scanning all the different types of things that could exist on your site. And then we categorize those into a few different ways. So there's cookies, of course. As I mentioned, there's scripts, which are typically like JavaScript lines that you add to your website, those types of things, different tools that you're running. There's iframes, which sometimes those scripts will also set iframes, so you need to capture those as well. And then there's also malicious scripts, which we categorize in a different way. We don't do a whole lot there today, but we're expanding in that area to make sure that we capture malicious scripts and block them always. So just an extra level of protection for our customers. So that's the consent stuff. And I'll come back in a second to kind of, well, actually, why don't we dive into what that looks like first on the user experience, and then I'll dive into the other areas after that. So yeah, the first thing that people will typically do with our solution is that they'll configure the consent banner. And so that's what you see here at the bottom of the screen. Fully configurable, brandable, you can do all that stuff. We'll take a look at how that works in the admin UI in a minute. But basically, that's what shows up here. There's some additional features built into this. There's a thing called the global privacy control that companies now need to support. That's called GPC, global privacy control. That's what this little opt-out is, and that's because I'm using a privacy browser called Brave. But basically, you have to detect that. This is according to laws like the California CCPA/CPRA, where they require you to actually utilize that detected signal. And that can be sent by privacy browsers like Brave, but also different types of Chrome extensions and whatnot. But basically, when you detect that, you need to basically turn on Do Not Sell, which is another option you can configure within the banner. And then you also need to turn off marketing consent. So that all happens automatically with the GPC detection stuff that we do. And then instead of me accepting all, let's go in and look at what it looks like if you customize.
Dash,
Yep.
Dash, sorry, on a side note, because you mentioned Brave, what browser do you like the best? Like, just a personal opinion.
I like Brave. I've been using it for a while. Yeah, like we had some early stuff that we were testing out in the market. We decided not to release a few years back. We were in a blockchain venture studio looking at some blockchain kind of level stuff on the consent side. So it was us and 5 other firms. Brave was one of those. So we were part of that.
Comfortable with that? Yeah. Brave.
Yeah.
Anil, what are you using? What's your preference for browsers? Oh, muted mic.
Yeah. I just use Chrome.
Chrome.
Just
okay.
stick with Chrome.
I've Chrome and then Brave. I like, and mainly Ghost browser the last couple of years. But you know, I'm just curious. We always like to get this, especially since you're a data guy. I was figured let's ask Dash, because in all the groups, a lot of people, big conversation. Which browser to use? Which browser? And I have seen more and more Brave. So another vote for Brave from Dash.
Yep. Right. Yeah, I'm a fan of Brave. I think it does some interesting stuff. I like some of the auto blocking it does as well.
Thanks.
But yeah, so here's the consent settings. As I mentioned in this case, because I am using Brave and we detected that signal, you'll see that marketing's off by default in this case. And then if we go into any of these, you can also see some of the tools that we're using. This is part of the kind of auto categorization that happens. And again, we'll take a look at that in a few minutes in terms of where that's set and how you deal with that. But yeah, I'll close this out. And then in this case, I'll just accept all. And then what we then do after that is we have the little floating button here, which you can also configure within the UI. And that basically allows people to revisit consent. This is what I was talking about when I was talking about history. So this is my individual consent history. You don't see this in pretty much any tools that are out there other than Concord, but basically it's there to build that trust layer. That's why we kind of bundle it with disclosures as well as the privacy option stuff, which is ultimately those privacy request forms that we talk about. And so, yeah, you can see my individual level consent within here. And then I could still go back in and change these settings as well if I'd like. So that's kind of the core consent experience. And then the early kind of piece of privacy requests, which actually, let me jump back in there and we can take a look at what that looks like from a user perspective. So according to the different regulations, most of them have the requirement for this. You do have to give people the ability to submit different types of requests. Those requests usually take the form of something like get a copy of my data, delete my data, that type of stuff. Now, depending upon which state we're talking about or different region throughout the world, there's different requirements based on sizing. Some have that, some don't. California, as an example, has like a certain minimum threshold around the number of users, and then different types of things like company or revenue size. And so you don't always have to do this in all those places. We still recommend, though, that you do it. It's just a best practice to build trust as well. So you may not have to do these requests and fully perform them, but we still recommend that it's a good practice.
Now,
right?
here's a dumb question. Is it for location of business or server location of the site?
It's actually the user themselves.
The
So
user
yeah,
themselves. It has nothing to do with, so you have to be compliant to the user. If your business is in California and you have someone in, Germany, that user, you have to worry about them. It's not as much about your
yep,
location.
yeah, 100%. And that's a common misconception, right? People think,
Yeah.
oh, maybe I'm not in California, so I don't have to, deal with CCPA or CPRA, and that's just not true. And same with GDPR. So even if you're in the States and you have a single user that visits your website
Just
from
one.
Europe, you are bound by GDPR. So
I mean,
GDPR,
yeah. I
and they
knew
don't have any.
it's always users. I mean, I knew like Concord would handle the user. Obviously, it's all about the privacy there. But then I was always wondering, well, what about your home base? Do you have to worry about that? But if your business is in Los Angeles and you have no users from LA, from California, you don't have to worry about California at all. I'm just saying. I mean, you got to put that in the picture because you can't guarantee where people are coming from. But I'm just using an example. If you're focused on like a certain country that's not part of United States
No, but
or
but like what Dash probably knows better. But what I figured that it's what I've learned over the years is that so exactly what Dash said earlier was that so if you don't have any users, uh, let's say users meaning your client or customers, but that does not mean that a user or a visitor can't be or happen to be from California, living in
exactly.
California,
So you
and
have to
it's from
keep it
the same
all
perspective.
checked. You have to keep it checked just in case.
Pretty much. So that's what I do. I just,
Yeah.
I'm like a tiny fish in the big pond, but I just do everything. And somebody from Europe could be visiting
You
and
never know. Yeah. Yeah. You
traveling to
better safe than
California.
sorry.
Yeah,
But a lot of the
exactly.
conversations that we see, like in groups, is that, oh, I'm just worried about this. What are you compliant in Europe? That's all I need. And they're not getting the big picture of you just have to be ready for everything. Just enable it all. You don't know. Like Antarctica, a penguin might visit your site. I don't know. You got to be checked off penguin friendly.
Yeah, it's confusing, right? We get
I'm
that. I mean, that's
confused.
yeah, that's one of our goals is to make this simpler for people. And
Concord for Dummies. Make like a nice book. Send it to me. I'll be your first purchaser.
but yeah, and trust me that like I said, that's a super common misconception, right?
Yeah.
Where people think it's around where they're based or where their customer happens to be physically like located, right? And of course, different with more remote companies nowadays. But regardless of that, yes, at the end of the day, it's about the individual user and where they're visiting from. So that also means it's not even where they live. Like if you have someone that's traveling over to Europe and they happen to live in the States and they visit your website from Europe, that is also GDPR required.
Wow.
And then GDPR is a little different than some of the state ones I was mentioning, where some of the state ones have exclusions around number of data points that you're maintaining on different people or revenue kind of requirements. GDPR doesn't have any of that. So in most cases, if you have any traffic whatsoever, even a single person, you'll typically be bound by GDPR. So you do need to actually do these types of requests, which is why we recommend in 99.9% of cases just handle the request, right?
I don't know why they have all these different systems. Why? I mean, even like the metric system and then what we have, it's like, come on, just make it all one thing. We have enough things to worry about here in all this technology.
I think all the different legislators have meant well when they've kind of done these different things. And of course, I think it's really good that privacy is at the top of conversation. I think it's good that these laws do exist. I think in practice they could have been implemented a little bit better or written a little better in some cases. And I think there is always that constraint, as I think especially small to mid-sized businesses, how do you deal with all these different varying laws? And that's really our goal, is to solve that problem.
That's where you guys come in. So it's good that there are all these systems for Concord.
Yep. So, but in terms of actually submitting these requests, the user comes in, they do get a copy, they submit this. We then do some identity verification as part of the flow. We're a pretty big AWS shop. We do that for a few different reasons, mainly just making sure that our stuff is fully compliant and always like up and running and ready for large scale. We do process a large number of events. And so like I mentioned, we're full Amazon AWS. And we also use full on like server instances and stuff to make sure we scale a bit quicker than some of the stuff you can do with serverless. But lots of stuff that we're doing on that front. But when those come in, we do identity verification. We use some of the kind of Amazon stuff there as well. But basically, we make sure they are who they say they are. And then that stuff feeds into the automated workflow stuff that exists within Concord. I'll show you how that works in a minute as well. All right, so that's the first piece, consent. And I know I'm burning through a whole lot here. So if there's, follow-up questions that people have, I know we'll do some Q&A at the end, but I'm also happy to answer any questions via email or jump on a call with anybody else that wants to kind of dive deeper on anything. All right, so privacy request. We just hit on this on how you submit those. As I mentioned, this goes through a full automated workflow as well. And we also connect this to the data mapping, data system stuff that I'll talk through here in a second. So we'll take a look at some of the settings in a few minutes when we jump into the actual admin UI. And then the last piece is data mapping. As was mentioned already, there are quite a few different ways that people deal with data system categorization, script categorization, data mapping, data system type of stuff. We do this in a few different ways. So you do not always have to do this piece also. So in the case of GDPR, they have what they call the record of processing activities. That one actually does have an exclusion that's based on size. It's usually 250 employees or greater is required to do those types of things. But some companies still that are smaller will do this as well. Or if you grow into it, we have that feature for you folks that are looking for that type of stuff. But basically, there's a few reasons you would do data mapping. That's one of them. Compliance-wise, you'd want to basically adhere to something like the record of processing activities in the case of GDPR. The second one is you just want a single source of truth for all the systems that you use and the type of data that resides with them, and then the types of controls that you have over those. That can be useful for companies of all sizes. And then the third is that we use those in terms of those privacy requests that I was talking about. So when you do receive a request, how do you actually deal with that request? And so I'll show you how that stuff works when we jump in here. On that front, we do have lots of different integrations, lots of different systems that are supported. And then, of course, the automated workflows and reporting stuff that we'll take a look at. So with that said, let's jump over into the admin console. And actually, I know we've gotten some questions recently about Google Consent Mode, V2, and the Google certification process. I mentioned a few of the comments. We have the development work done there. And then we're doing final kind of certification and process review stuff with the Google team as we speak. So that's definitely coming. We can't guarantee exact timing on the certification. They do have some backlogs at Google right now, but we do have assigned resources. We're working with a few set folks. We have an assigned account manager and then an assigned technical lead as well. And so we're in the middle of doing that verification process. We did submit the Google Tag Manager template that relates to this stuff to the community store earlier. That'll probably go live in a couple days, we would expect. And then, as I mentioned, the actual dev work is done here as well. So I'll show the slightly different experience here that's not available to the customers yet, just so you can see kind of how the onboarding stuff will work probably next week. so you can see the slide.
This looks a nice UI. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. In terms of deployment, so typically what you'll do when you first get into Concord is you'll add us or embed us within whatever kind of website solution you're using. And so is this good in dark mode, or would you guys rather I go to light mode, by the way?
It looks good to me. I mean,
okay.
Could tell us in the comments.
Try a light mode, and I think when it comes to presentation, well, I guess with the large
It's
screen,
tough.
it probably
Yeah,
won't
if
matter. It's almost the same.
the viewers see different than we do because we're in a stage. So hopefully they can see it clear.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll leave it here for now. All right, so let's see. So the kind of direct embed code component. So that's the most standard method, and this works in pretty much all CMSs or different types of web tools. So whether or not you're building your own website and something like Astro or React or whatever, you can typically use this embed code there, but you can also use it in places like WordPress and whatnot. And so to do that, you'll typically just copy this little script here, and then you'll pop that up in the head. We should usually be the first thing that's set always, so that we can basically do the blocking and identification stuff correctly. So you don't ever want something to run before us in most cases, unless you're doing something related to Google here that I'll talk about in a minute. But in most cases, we run first, and that way we go through the kind of scanning and blocking process based on the individual user consent. So you'll add that, as I mentioned, to the head. And then when it comes to Google consent mode, basically what this does, and there's two different ways you can do this. There's basic and advanced. We do support both in the release that's going live here soon. But essentially, it communicates the consent preferences from the user to Google so that it syncs. Usually you would do that if you're using something like Google Tag Manager, or you can also do with GTag. But in most cases, you would be doing this if you're using the Google Tag Manager version. And then in that front, you need to decide if you're doing basic or advanced. Basic essentially blocks the Google tags until consent is set, which is the most privacy-friendly option. And then the advanced mode uses their newer cookieless pings, which does send some data about users in an anonymous quotation way prior to consent being received by the user. There's some debate over which one of those is best, but basic is, of course, the most privacy-friendly one. And ultimately, that's communicates that information to Google as well. As I mentioned, there's a kind of Google Tag Manager template that goes along with this stuff. And that piece is basically allows you to implement that at the GTM level and then do anything you're doing with Google Tag Manager. Even in that scenario, we'll typically recommend that you install the direct embed code at the top, regardless, and you do not launch us through GTM. The reason for that is because if you're doing GTM, you would then have to make sure every single script and everything that you have, iframe scripts, everything needs to be in GTM. And then we would have to run first. That's usually not the case. People typically have something else that's running on their page or something. So because of that, it's best to basically put us in the direct embed. So always follow the first piece here and then use us with GTM and Google consent mode by turning on that option, which we have over here under our consent settings. And so you can change this between disabled, basic, and advanced. And then essentially that allows us to essentially communicate with them. And as I mentioned, the difference mainly being between basic and advanced, whether or not we pre-block Google until consent. So, which we do recommend. That's usually the best practice if you want to go full privacy friendly.
Dash, could you please elaborate a little bit more on the template, the GTM template that you just mentioned?
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a subtle piece of it that people might miss. That what you mean is that there is a GTM template that Concord has created that when people actually click on that link, and use that instead and put everything related to GTM using that template instead of using GTM or Google's own events and other types and things like that, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a mix. So typically, if you're going to use GTM here, you're probably already using Google Tag Manager in some other manner. What you would do is you would take our template here, and then you would essentially add that to your Google Tag Manager setup as one of the tags. And they have some different options within Google Tag Manager, including the ability to select consent initialization, which is a newer thing tied to consent mode. We'll have full instructions, by the way, in the docs that are launching here too. And as I mentioned, we're here to help. So we know this is another one that's like overly complicated. It's not us, I swear. It's Google in this case. But they are moving in the right direction. They're doing some cool stuff here. So we're glad to kind of integrate and make sure that stuff is kind of meeting those guidelines. But yeah, you would basically add us, and then we would need to run first over there. But along with that template that we have, the one you're mentioning that's kind of linked here, that would also include some kind of baseline settings, and then it handles the syncing of consent as the primary purpose. So that like back when you're here, if you change your consent as a user, like if I change, turned off functional here and confirm that, right when that happens, that would pass that to Google as well, and it would sync. And then the functional would be turned off on the Google Tag Manager side, so it's full in compliance. And Google, they now require you to use a CMP. And so that's actually part of the kind of new system. So they don't provide their own tooling there. You need to use something like Concord.
We have a question here about, does that mean we get less numbers in GA4?
It would if you're fully compliant, which there's two options for that. As I mentioned, there's the basic and advanced mode. In basic, because we're going to block until the user basically accepts analytics in that case. The data wouldn't flow to Google in that state. And then if they never accept, of course, you'll never get anything, which is as designed, right? You don't want to collect data for someone that hasn't consented. Right. But in the case of Google specifically in their advanced mode, what they do if you have advanced mode on is they do send those cookieless pings, which includes some data, and then they do some machine learning stuff behind the scenes without using the PII of that individual user to basically fill in the gaps for the non-consented data. So that's basically what advanced mode is doing and what Google's doing with the cookieless pings. So if you're really worried about that stuff, you'd want to run in advanced mode to ensure that the numbers didn't decline, but you will also should expect a decline in any case where you're implementing a fully compliant consent management solution, just because you're going to give some people the choice to block, which is really the goal of many of these laws. If someone doesn't want something collected, you shouldn't. All right, let's see. Any other questions there?
Yeah, I mean, you want to go through some, you want to finish what you got there, or do you want to go through some questions? Up to you.
Yeah, why don't I'll finish off here, and then we can just open it up, and that way we kind of cover the whole kit and caboodle.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, so yeah, that's the implementation stuff there as well. As I mentioned, there's kind of additional advanced settings and custom code stuff. So this is, as I mentioned, our own kind of lightweight tag management kind of solution where you would typically do things like in this case, we're actually doing some additional kind of tracking of consent events with our code. In most cases, you don't need to do this, but that's there for kind of more advanced scenarios. And then when it goes into the other piece that we didn't touch on yet, so we looked at consent, privacy request front. Let's take a real quick look at the request logs, and let me do that here in our actual non-feature environment. So in this one, you'll see that we receive these different requests, like a delete, a do not sell. And essentially what you do when you receive these requests is you'll come in and you'll go into one that's like submitted. You'll mark this as acknowledged. And then you'll see that down here, we have a data system task list. This is essentially required to check these off. And that's basically the ensuring that you've checked all the systems that are considered to potentially store PII data. So this is that third piece I was mentioning when it came to data systems and data mapping on why you would do it, because it basically gives you a checklist of what you need to do to actually perform this request. In the case of this is a do not sell request, so that's a little different. But if it was a get a copy request, in those cases, you do actually you're supposed to deliver data to the user. You'll typically kind of put all those files together, and that's a hard thing to deliver that securely. So we do provide an upload option that will show up when you're in that type of request, where you just upload the files, we zip it all together, and then we deliver that in another experience, which is our privacy portal experience. And so that's a secure way to deliver that stuff. And we also do the identity verification stuff there as well. Again, I won't go into a lot of detail on like these like super long flows, but you can kind of get a sense of that. And if you ever have any questions on how to do that, docs or hit us up on support, on the support side.
Can you touch just briefly? Can you touch on identification piece of it? Like, how do you just on a very high level, how do you actually identify people, like who's requesting and that
Yeah,
kind
so
of
we do
thing?
that we do the validation via email. So you need to, and we'll do like a 24-hour kind of expiring link. So you need to basically go in and validate that you are who you say you are when you submit a request. And that's why if you see one that's marked pending verification here, that means they haven't email validated. So you do not need to perform those ones or act upon those ones because that user hasn't actually email validated. So it allows you to basically avoid requests that could be just not real requests that don't actually have a validation method. So, and that's part of kind of what you're allowed to do is according to those regulations, make sure they are who they say they are, and then before you actually perform that actions on that request. And that's the same thing we do on the delivery, especially when it comes to data, right? We want to make sure that if you're giving data to somebody, that's not always an easy problem to solve because you don't want to just email somebody necessarily. And then you don't want to just give them a link to something that's on like, Office 365 or via Google Drive or something, right? Because you want to make sure it's
Right.
validated. So you don't want somebody getting somebody else's data. So because of that, that's why we do that separate privacy portal experience and additional email verification prior to any downloads. All right, let's see. So that's the request setting stuff. We already went through consent. And then last thing we'll talk about is how you actually configure data systems. As was mentioned earlier, we use these in a few different ways. Some tools will do more of the scanning and kind of identification of systems. I think IUBenda was one that we talked about earlier this week a little bit as we are kind of prepping for some of this stuff. And in that case, that's usually more similar to what we do under cookies and scripts and classification there. And actually, we can jump here. And so this is how you typically go through and classify the different cookies and scripts. And so you'll see we'll auto identify a number of things. So we have a pretty large like global library of these, and we'll classify them to things like marketing or analytics or whatever. You do want to go through this list after you implement Concord and basically check anything that's ignored or marked as unclassified. The difference is that ignored is for scripts and iframes, and then unclassified is for cookies. Anything that's unclassified on the cookie side, you do always want to make sure you classify. And then the ignored ones, we're pretty aggressive on making sure we capture every single thing that could potentially set data. So because of that, you'll also see like some scripts that you may not need to classify, like your own, JavaScript that's running, that's, something that's related to WordPress or Webflow or whatever. And so because of that, you still want to go through and review those, but you don't have to classify all the ignores. But it's there to make sure that nothing falls between the cracks. And so we think it's an important part of the process. Again, that's a pretty big differentiator between us and some of the other providers, in that we are definitely focused on making sure this is done correctly and that stuff is actually compliant. There are other tools, as I mentioned, that struggle with that part of the equation. So yeah, definitely something you go through here. And as I think we were talking about earlier, there's a difference between like an apt or a script and then a data system. And so think about like all the different things you could use from Facebook as an example. And you might have a whole bunch of different scripts for different purposes. And then think about Facebook as a data system, in that if you were going to go delete somebody's data from Facebook, Facebook's the system, right? Or same thing like HubSpot's the system, even if you use a bunch of their other stuff, right? Like you might use them for form collection. You might use them for other purposes on your website, right? Some analytics stuff, perhaps. So those are all different uses and apps. And so those will show up under here. But when it comes to data systems, when you start going down that path, you're thinking about it more in terms of what's the overarching data system, right? So let's jump back to this guy and we'll take a look through a new one. All right. So in this case, we have, like in this example, HubSpot. And so in our case, we basically use HubSpot and we collect data either in like, user submitted forms, built-in data collection. That's stuff that will, either happen from a user doing something on a form on the website, or built-in data collections, like if you're entering a new record within HubSpot, right? And then in terms of the data that can be in there, we'll have things like, employment data, or, postal address sometimes, like for a given company, or name and whatnot. And so this is what you're typically doing when you do a full data mapping exercise. And again, you do not have to do this typically as a small to medium-sized business, but it's recommended that you at least start on this path, right? It's super useful in understanding where data lives. And this is getting really, really important with AI. As I mentioned, there is a bunch of stuff that's already happened and will be happening in the future around AI governance. As an example, over in the EU, they already passed what they call the EU AI Act. That specific act went into effect a few months ago, full effect. And basically, it doesn't allow certain things. So they have like 4 levels of classification, including the most prohibited one, where you can't do things like social scoring, which many people do today. So that's completely forbidden. So because of that, you need to start thinking about what data goes where, and how is that data then used, right? So there's often scenarios, especially with AI, where you do not want data to make it downstream into the wrong model, right? You don't want your proprietary information in there, but you also don't want data that's not consented to be in there either, right? So that's why it's important to understand both the user level consent and also desired use on your side. Like, what's the usage of a particular piece of data or the data from a given system? Like, where do you want that potentially flowing, right? And in many cases, you may not want it to accidentally make it into the wrong model on the large language model front. So definitely something to think about, I think, as we move forward. As we look at what we're building in terms of solutions, we know, again, that that's even more complicated and even trickier to understand and harder to adhere to, especially as small kind of growing companies. Like, how do you deal with this stuff, right? It becomes very overwhelming very quickly. And
during this AI revolution, you're in the middle of it, growing with, all this new AI content out there.
Totally. Yeah, it's a huge challenge. So, our goal always as a company is we want to simplify this stuff for all of you, make it as easy as possible, and really just make it like as push button as it can be. And, there's always going to be certain things you're going to have to do. And we're always working through and refining the onboarding experience and kind of the guided experiences.
Well, you can make a Concord college, where you can teach some classes on this stuff, because it's great. It's great learning about this.
Totally. Yeah. And this is actually a huge opportunity, I think, for a lot of agencies and stuff out there. I know a lot of, folks in the LTD community are definitely agency folks as well. And it's a huge advantage if you kind of understand some of the baseline pieces here and you know how to deliver this stuff to your client, just because it's such a core requirement going forward, right? Like, to really build, whether or not you're building like a website from scratch or you're doing other types of services on top of an existing website, I think understanding at least the minimum in terms of like how those different things work is definitely key. And yeah, we're looking to develop some more content and those types of things as well for our users and just the community in general, to make sure that those things are as simple as they can be, so you at least understand the basics, and then we take over the hard to do stuff underneath the hood, right?
So for a lot of people here in LTD community, not to mean that they're not bigger businesses, but a lot of solopreneurs and small businesses. One example I would suggest for people to actually think through about the data mapping or data system is to think about simple things. If you have a WooCommerce store and you got Stripe linked, or whatever payment processor system you have, so what are the things that you're actually asking people to fill in order for you to actually sell your product or services? So start from there and just think about what data you're asking your customers or potential customers to fill in before they can actually buy something from you. And just think from that perspective. Just start small, start simple with really the basic stuff that you have on your website or in your app, what you're exactly doing with your business. How are you actually doing business, and what tools you're using, and just go one by one. You can always go back and actually edit those as you go. So at least you have something in place. So that's what I would suggest, rather than getting overwhelmed by like, what is this all data systems and mapping and categories and states, and so
Yeah, I'm like, we have a guy
yeah.
at the agency that handles this part. That's his
Yeah.
department. I should have had him on the call instead of me, because now I appreciate him more, what he does every day. I'm like, just put the accept all thing, put the consent. It's okay. Just how does it look on the website that we designed? Don't mess up the look. Don't bog it down with all this stuff, all this legal jargon. That's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really great feedback. And I think, start slow and sure, like you'll figure that stuff out. And again, we're here to help too, right? Like a big part of what we're trying to do for everybody is like make sure that we're providing the guidance and the support that you need to, start implementing these things in the right way. And because, smaller to growing companies can take their time with things like data mapping. We'll typically recommend that you start with, the cookie consent stuff, get that stuff up and running, do the categorization there, reach out to us if you need any help on any of that stuff, and we'll make sure you get set up there. Then you start moving into the privacy request stuff, making sure that's good to go. In many cases, you can use the defaults without having to do too much else outside of that. And then finally move into data mapping and think about how you start documenting the systems that you're using. But I think even if you don't need to do those things, for sure, you at least have the option to do that as you continue to grow. And also, we do think it's just, again, it's really beneficial as a company to understand like the footprint that you have across different systems, and how data flows between those systems is very, very, very important, especially with, as I mentioned, the stuff on the AI front.
Can't do the simple banners anymore.
But yeah, that's pretty much it on I think on the demo side. We can stop there and then just open it up.
No,
for
that was
questions.
great. Thanks, Dash. That was Concord College open for classes. I could have some students that want to enroll. Let me know if I could get financial aid. I'll definitely sign up.
By the way, one more thing, Dash, along those data systems and data mapping, I think you might have mentioned to me the other day that at some point you're going to have Concord is going to be able to scan your website and then maybe set up some default data systems as well. Did I get that right? Like at least some basic ones if it detects, let's say, Stripe and something like really common stuff.
Yeah, that's part of the goal. We're tying that to some of the policy generation work. So we don't currently
Okay,
generate
it's part of
privacy
that.
policies
Yep.
or cookie policies or terms. There was definitely quite a few requests for that from the LTD community. We haven't typically needed that on the kind of larger enterprise side. So we did decide to prioritize that higher. That's going to happen right after we wrap up some of the final work here with the Google Consent Mode and the TCF stuff for kind of advertiser publisher support. So yeah, when we wrap those pieces up, we're working on the privacy policy generator. When we do that, we'll start looking at some auto kind of ties. So basically tying together what happens between cookies and scripts and data systems in terms of like, if we detect a certain script, to your point, we could then be like, hey, you might want to add this data system, right? Or we might even automatically do it. So yeah, definitely something that's coming down the pipe. We'll see kind of what level we go when we go, but that's definitely coming in the future state for sure.
Sounds great. Yeah, thank you.
Let's go to the questions. From Faz, are you dismayed at the level of data mining occurring overall in the online space by large organizations? Or are you
Yes.
staying neutral? Good answer.
No.
Are you staying neutral?
Yeah, definitely. That was one of the reasons I originally founded Concord. Yeah. So
That
like,
was, yeah.
I again, I'm a huge believer that there's a right way to do this that's better for us as companies and the people that we work with as customers or prospects. And when you do it the right way, you actually build better trust and ultimately better growth. So like, we are huge believers that if you do this stuff correctly, you're going to grow as a company in a better way than if you didn't do this. And so that's a huge focus of like what we do from an experience standpoint, but it's also our mission, right? Our mission is to make sure that, and by the way, this is why we call the company Concord. So it means, mutually beneficial ultimately, right? Like agree.
Yeah, I think there was a question about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really about creating to us that mutually beneficial relationship between us as companies and then the users and prospects that we want to work with.
Does it come with a cookie banner?
Yep. So yeah, definitely. That was that. Yeah, we showed that a little bit ago, but yeah, if you didn't see that, take a look at the earlier video. But yeah, you'll see that there's full cookie banner support with all the bells and whistles, of course.
Do you plan to support WordPress
Yeah, so we
integration?
support WordPress today. We pretty much support all CMSs and different types of tools that you would use. It's pretty simple to add the I'm not sharing now, but we showed a little earlier where we had the kind of single line of code that you grab from our embed Concord section. When you grab that in WordPress, there's a few different ways, but you basically just go into any type of thing where you can edit the head. And at the very top, you just pop in our script. In the future, we'll do a WordPress plugin as well, just to make that even easier and to control some additional settings from the WordPress experience. But today, you don't need to do that per se. You can definitely integrate with WordPress very easily right now. If you need more details on that, just feel free to reach out to us as well.
Is there a client version of Concord that could travel to different sites with and protect ourselves as consumers?
That's a really good question. There's not today. That was what we were originally building when we first started as a company. It was a kind of a cross site kind of shared consent solution that would basically cross brand boundaries and allow you to kind of supported brands to basically opt into that as well. We may revisit that stuff in the future. There wasn't really a good enough market for it when we were looking for kind of early product market fit. We think there's a huge opportunity for that type of stuff in the future, but it's not something we're currently doing.
Bill, is ADA compliance included too?
In terms of I have to see more details around kind of what you're looking for there. So most likely
It's probably not. Probably
Yeah.
not. I'm speaking for you, but as far as I can see, and I don't know too much about ADA, but know a few things, and so that's, I think, is a different kind of ball game,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly. So yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
yeah.
there's probably some components of like the ADA that deal with some of the data components, and we would probably like
Mhm,
potentially cover a few of those, but yeah, we wouldn't be like a solution for ADA compliance straight up
mhm,
by any means.
yeah.
Mabel, how to make consent more user friendly, as we don't want to give too much jargon to the end users on consent, which depends on the type of compliance. Yeah, this is what I was kind of saying before, with a lot of that jargon, which is important jargon. How to make it more user friendly. I mean, you have the templates, I guess, that help.
Yeah, you can change anything that you want that shows up in our banner or privacy center. So all the text is fully overridable within the admin UI. So you can definitely change anything you want there. We do work with lawyers and different folks to basically, we actually use 3 different legal shops depending upon the need. But basically that is legal review today. I think there's different views on that where, yeah, how do you make it more friendly? We were always looking for options there, right? We don't want it to be overwhelming for the users. It's definitely something you need to check today in terms of like a compliance check mark. But yeah, it's definitely something we're always looking for. Is like how do we make things a little more friendly, a little more understanding? We do have some stuff planned on the kind of feature side. One example of that is we're going to be releasing essentially a configurable consent option, which is when does the banner first show to a user. So they'll be based on some data. So you can choose if you don't want to show them the banner on the first visit, you could choose to show it to them on the second visit, as an example. So once they've actually shown interest in your brand, that's some of the type of stuff we're looking at to improve those experiences and ultimately actions that people end up taking. You'd have to be okay with losing a little data during that first session, but it might be a better experience for the users.
So one of the things I'm going to add to what Dash said about the making the language or options user friendly, I think if we think in terms of, so if you go in there, give it a try, or go watch my well, I might not have shown everything as part of the domain setup and data system setup and mapping, but it is kind of overwhelming in the beginning. But what you need to think about is, let's say you're using ActiveCampaign, an email platform, or VBout, or any of these. You can call it, those are basically data systems. So because you're capturing data, you're storing data, you're using data, and are you the controller? So some of the things that is hard to find another word or terminology, unfortunately. And so if you think about carefully, so when you look at the form, when you did data mapping, doing the data mapping so I set one up for me, for example, Thrive Cart. So it could be any shopping cart or whatever. And so it may be overwhelming in the beginning when you start doing that. And it's like, oh, now I got to think through origin, destination, controller, joint controller. But just try to think in your mind very simplistically, because I don't think a system so powerful and to be compliant can actually change the terminology, so to speak, right? Because if someone gets into legalities, I would think that then you gotta stick with that terminology. Okay, so where is your data? Where are you capturing? Where is it going to? So that's like origin and destination. So you sit there and you say, like, I have no idea what origin and destination means, but actually it's just that. So I
Totally.
would just take that kind of mindset and just do very simple data system setup if you need to, if you want to, and to be compliant. And then, like Dash said, that even if you're not required to at this point, it might be a good idea to go in there and start very simple, like some of your payment processors that you're using. Just start with that, because you probably know exactly what you're doing with that data, or Stripe is doing in this example with that
Yeah,
data,
definitely.
right? So
Yeah, for sure. And then, and I think also on like some of the language stuff that we do on the banner and the privacy center front that relates to some of that, like we definitely we do the legal review with that text, but we also try and make it as clear and transparent to the user as part of what we're doing there, right? So like
right,
often best practice is to call out things like accept all does X, Y, or Z, so that you know that like as a user, they see a little more around what it's doing. And that actually manifests itself in usually more opt-ins, by the way. So the clearer that you are in the text and the banners, the more likely they're going to opt in, because if you make it more clear, there's more of a trust layer that's built. Like the more transparent you are, and some people might think it's the opposite, where they're like, well, let me make it as like ambiguous as possible, or try and like make this text as small as I can. And like when you end up doing that, you'll often see the opposite result than you would want, which is they'll be more likely to opt out. So yeah, the more kind of transparent you can be with that stuff, and we always look to kind of refine that to make it as clear as it can be. And we're always looking to kind of update that stuff, as I mentioned a little earlier as well, to align with best practices legally, but also to drive the best results ultimately for the users. That's based around trust.
Do you see Concord extending their privacy services to encryption of website forms and other data collection processes like HIPAA compliance?
Not right now. That's not something we're looking to do in terms of like encrypted type of storage or anything. We are looking at other areas. So we will be announcing it soon, but we acquired another company as well that's in the analytics space. So we'll be doing some stuff around kind of compliant, privacy friendly data collection for use in like web and product analytics. It's fully end-to-end compliant and also can be used to feed data downstream via different data pipelines into different types of systems. So that's kind of the area that we're going, which is like what happens on the front end of the website, the experience that you have for your users, and ensuring that that's as good as it can be for you to build a trust layer. And then to also kind of open that gate for things like data collection and those things in a privacy compliant way, so that you can make sure that data that is collected is fully compliant all the way down throughout all your other systems. So we know that's a really hard problem to solve today. So it's definitely something that we'll be doing more of. It's things around actual data classification and permitted data use and that type of stuff, as opposed to doing like encrypted forms and stuff like that.
What would be the additional cost for HIPAA? Its compliance is more stringent.
Yeah, HIPAA is an interesting one. In most cases, we're HIPAA compliant in terms of what we do. But yeah, HIPAA has additional kind of requirements behind the scenes. So yeah, but our kind of from our baseline, because we're at the front end in terms of what data is collected and what's made available downstream, we're basically just a gate that determines whether or not data flows, right? And so what we do is, not necessarily HIPAA non-compliant, if you will, right? So, but yeah, HIPAA is a kind of obviously a bigger thing that you'd want to look at. We've definitely, we've worked with quite a few healthcare organizations over the years. I've worked a lot myself with Kaiser and other folks, but so we're always looking at options. It is one of the verticals we focus on. But yeah, if you have questions about that type of stuff, let me know. That's definitely a deeper topic we want to talk about offline.
Here's why is Canada so lax in requirements compared to Europe and the US? Is there something forthcoming for Canadian business serving Canadians?
Potentially, yeah. So they've had PIPEDA for a while. PIPEDA is the kind of law that's been around, I think, early 2000s, maybe 2002 or four, somewhere in there. And yeah, that's been a part of their system for quite a while, but they're in need of a refresh. So there's definitely some stuff that's being debated there, similar to like here in the States, we've been debating a federal privacy law for years. There's one that's got bipartisan support. It's been quite a bit closer than others in terms of getting over the line. The main issue, I think, a lot of times what you deal with, and I would imagine Canada is similar to the States in that the holdup here is specifically states' rights and whether or not those supersede the federal ones. So there's kind of two different opinions on that. One is like if there's a federal data privacy law in the US, can you still have state privacy laws that could be greater than that and have like additional requirements for certain states? And then there's other folks that want like a federal law goes into effect and it wipes out all the different state laws that we deal with today. Because right now there's 20 different privacy laws now across the US. Like we had a couple more recently in the last couple months. And so, yeah, they continue to pass. I think 40% now of the states have their own privacy law that you have to adhere to in the US. And I think Canada's similar in that there's probably some debate over the kind of overarching Canada law and then individual provinces, right? So, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see which way that stuff goes. We do engage with some lawmakers and different legislators across different regions. And so we're always trying to keep abreast of the latest, greatest there. And of course, our legal folks help quite a bit there too. But definitely something we're interested to see kind of where that goes. I would expect in the case of the US and Canada for both to eventually have a overarching law, whether or not they supersede, TBD.
Brave, do you support webhook?
We don't today. That's also coming soon. So we do already have full advanced APIs. So we have the privacy API in terms of the AppSumo deal that's ending on September 10th, I believe. We basically have privacy API included in tier 3+, I believe. That is basically like you can do all the stuff you would typically do with a webhook. We actually use that API in like the Zapier integration as an example, but it could also be used in Pabbly or Elgato or whatever. That said, webhooks are a bit nicer because they're, basically a push versus a pull. So where you don't have to do a polling type of thing, which is what the Zapier integration does today, where it'll check every X minutes or whatever. So definitely we'll be doing webhooks. We don't imagine that being a whole lot of work because we already have all the backend systems in place to support that type of path. We're putting together kind of final requirements there in terms of how you'll select between the different events that get delivered via a given webhook. But yeah, it's definitely something we're familiar with and we'll be doing. It's I'd say sooner than later.
Aziz, if I have 10,000 users and 15 to 20,000 visits, which one counts?
We do visits or sessions, yeah. So, and that's some tools will do it differently. So some do just events, which we don't agree with because like events, you get penalized if a user has like a whole bunch of page views in a given session. So we kind of do the middle ground. So we do like sessions visits, and we think that's a good method. It came from a lot of our research. We looked at all the different tools and kind of standard pricing out there and like the best way to kind of track that stuff. And it kind of meets that need right in the middle where it's understandable enough and it makes sense in the middle, but you're not penalizing too much on the event side, but it's not full visitor level tracking either, which has its own complexities that you have to deal with in terms of like explaining how visitors work for sessions. So
are there plugins besides GTM that WordPress users have to track website visitors? Example, other types of tags. How does Concord automate that besides GTM?
Yeah, so in most cases, you'll just grab our single line of code and pop it into whichever tool you're using. And I mentioned like CMSs like WordPress, very easy to do in those, but it's other tools as well. Like, like our merch shop, as an example, we use a company called Fourth Wall for our merch shop, where you can get the sweet privacy shirts. So we basically have that wired up within their tool as well. Anything that allows basically custom code to be added, you can essentially add Concord to that as well. So pretty easy to integrate in 99% of systems. There's like a few that maybe we don't kind of fit into, but in most cases we should integrate fine in any given tool.
Since you're scanning for malicious scripts, is Concord also a malware, virus checker, redirect checker?
Yeah, so not fully yet. Like as I mentioned, we have that built in logic wise. So we're definitely scanning for malicious scripts, but the list is smaller. So we don't have like a huge library of malicious scripts yet, but we have the full logic train built in. So not yet. We're probably not going like full malware virus checker.
Yeah.
And then redirects either. That's not something we're looking to do. This would just be an extra level of protection to ensure that if there's something that we know that we've seen that's like a script that's malicious, like there's some that are like crypto based, there's like other ones that there was the polyfill thing that happened not too long ago. That was kind of a massive kind of issue with the open source repo that got hacked via some mix of social engineering and some other things. Those are types of examples that we would add to our malicious list, so that we'll basically block those ones that are well known in terms of causing potential problems. But yeah, we're not looking to be like, at least today, a holistic solution for that.
If we make tracking of visitors anonymous using other tools, don't track IP, how Concord will capture those visitors which didn't consent?
Yeah, so typically we're the ones that manages that on the client side. So even if you're using something else on that front, it would usually be a little further downstream, because you'll have us up in the head on the website. And so we do maintain our own cookie, of course, that basically tracks user consent, and then we maintain that for a period of time, by default 12 months. But that's also configurable within the admin UI, where you can change the consent expiration. That's actually coming with the new release that's going out with the Google consent mode. So there are certain countries, Germany is a good example, where they recommend 6 months instead of 12. And so that's why we have that configurable option. So you can combine that with the region stuff I briefly mentioned earlier, where you can configure the German region to basically expire our cookie after 6 months. When that happens, the consent banner will repop and the user needs to opt back in.
We've gone over an hour now. Dash, you have a little more time, Anil, just to go through these questions.
I'm okay if there are other questions.
Yeah, there's still a few more. We'll try to go through them quick. This way, I know you guys are busy, so.
Well, it's too late. I mean, it's much later for you, Joe.
No, I'm okay until I get yelled at in a little bit. Any live demos?
That you get yelled at anyway. So
everyone yells at me everywhere. Yeah. Any live demos of sites using Concord? Let's test in real time.
Yeah, so we did that a little earlier. So we did that, of course, the stuff on our site we were kind of walking through. I think, there's quite a few, I think, customers that are out there. I think we posted on some of the comments recently, some other sites you could take a look at.
Yeah.
So I don't think we'll go through another demo here today, but happy to
replay it. We can replay the video. Yeah. Phil, is there training included to teach us about this? Well, besides this session, which taught a lot, you have some stuff, I guess, on the website. You have a Facebook page, and do you have a YouTube channel?
We don't have a YouTube channel today, but definitely LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. So we're on all those, X.
And by the way, just to add, so the okay, this is some other question, I guess. But to answer the somewhat, if you're looking for help or help docs, so I kind of mentioned in my review video that what you will find inside of Concord app, that you're gonna have almost every place Concord has tooltip, and pretty much for, I think, 95% of the stuff that you need to do, the tooltip will just guide you through or explain things. So you almost, unless you're going to some specific special case of data system or data mapping for some complicated situation, that you need some help. Otherwise, I think you wouldn't even need to go into their, by the way, the very nice help doc system that they have on Concord website. It's boldly laid out with big, large buttons of getting started, and it pretty much walks you through. So you have that basically. So
Yeah, definitely.
Sarah, can your tool help us block cookies until consent?
Yeah, so we definitely do that. So yeah, that's a core part of our
Yeah.
value prop is
that's
and not just the cookies, but the scripts and the iframes that typically set the cookies, which is, as I mentioned a little earlier, definitely one of the gaps with some of the lower end tools.
Let's say you did a mapping previously, but arising from changes in forms or website layouts, there are more fields. Do we need to do a complete remapping, or we just edit, update the relevant ones? So if the website layout changes or the forms change?
Yeah, probably not. I need to understand a little more maybe about that use case. So feel free to follow up with us afterwards on that specific question. But I think in most cases, we do auto detect new types of scripts and iframes and whatnot. And then usually like layout changes, those things wouldn't play into that. So like you typically wouldn't have to do something different unless you add like a new form provider or something. And in that case, that would be something, if we didn't have it in our global library, you'd want to make sure and just double check under scripts and cookies if it got classified correctly. If it's not classified by us via the global library, you can then set that manually.
I think Dash answered this one, Anil as well. We already have, some review tools, YouTube channel in the future, I guess.
Yeah, we're always looking to improve that stuff. I do envision in the future we'll do some additional stuff around like university type of options with some video type of content and some kind of self-service stuff where we'll probably include some of this type of stuff that we've done as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, great session today.
Are there plans to introduce other privacy framework compliance? 13 plus U.S. states have privacy laws now.
Yep.
So much to track. Yeah, we're trying to cover this before.
Yeah, there's 20 now, actually. So yeah, 20 in the States. They're not all in full effect yet. Some of them go into effect in 2025, some in 2026. We definitely keep track of all those as they come down the pipe. We do support all of them today. So most of them have a very similar set of requirements in the States, especially where they're all pretty much blueprinted after the California law. So in most cases, we support that. We do support full region overrides. So if you want to do something like say, hey, in Oregon or Virginia or whatever, we allow you to do X, Y, or Z in the banner. You can do that. Usually you don't need to, but we definitely support that override capability with the region stuff. And then we usually, within our region selector, when you're first setting up regions, you'll see that we have GDPR as a template and we have the United States as a template. And that's because you typically don't need to go all the way down to the state level when you implement our standard kind of recommended best practices. So in most cases, that will meet the needs of all the different states. But we definitely are keeping our eye on any ones that go outside those bounds.
And just to mention also, if people, and correct me, Dash, because I noticed if I'm mentioning it wrong, on Concord.tech website, if you go under resources and you go under blog, I believe that's where you are publishing different kinds of posts, which is articles, newsletters, release notes, press releases. So in the articles, I believe that there's some awesome latest news that you are tracking for this privacy and compliance type news. So it's almost like a newsletter type of thing that I've noticed that you'll see boldly laid out under the blog slug there on their website. So check that out for sure.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, call out. Yeah, we definitely focus pretty heavily on that on the marketing side. So we also do this quite a bit on, the different channels like Twitter/X and Threads and, Facebook and LinkedIn and whatnot. But basically we do release quite a few posts each week that go into new kind of happenings in the space, including new laws. And then when there are new laws, we'll also include those typically in our newsletters. The newsletters go out every few weeks. And then we also do an additional articles and blog posts that go out related to new product releases, and then also just interesting topics that sometimes I cover in shorter form on LinkedIn or whatnot, and then we'll have the team kind of expand upon those and write longer form articles too.
Yeah, the latest one is August 19th that I see there. It's talking about Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty latest stuff coming out. So
This has been great session. Thank you, Dash and Anil, and everyone who's joined. Actually, Dash is kind enough. He's going to do a giveaway: 1 tier 3 lifetime deal and 4 tier 1 lifetime deals. That will be the winners will be selected after this session because we ran a little bit long. It was definitely educational. I think anyone who jumped on late should probably definitely replay this, because even if you're not going to buy Concord, the information, the stuff that I learned that I thought I knew that I wasn't sure about, I'm sure a lot of other users. Yeah, I mean, Concord College, I'm telling you, Dash, you got to market that. I know Anil knows a lot more of this stuff, but I
well,
love it.
I don't know more than Dash for sure,
Oh yeah, no, I
and
don't
and
think.
and Concord team, and half the college is right there under blog, by the way. So
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's right there. They just need to turn them into like some kind of video
No, you could just
tutorial
do
bite
like some
size or
virtual.
whatever.
You could do
Just
some like Zoom meets, virtual classes with
right.
Dash. That'll cost a little extra. I know. You're working on a platform here, a tool. You're too busy for this stuff. But yes, Anil, check out his YouTube channel. I've shown it a few times up here. And Dash, Concord, definitely AppSumo.com if you want a lifetime deal till September 10th, you said, Dash,
Yep.
correct? If not, Concord.tech. Check out more there. We'll see you in the comments here. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Great to join and really appreciate it.
Yeah, we're getting good feedback. Dash is a good communicator. Yep, definitely. All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you, everyone who joined. We'll announce the winners later. And maybe we'll get Dash to come on once again in the future for some more educational data privacy stuff.
Yeah.
And Anil, of course, definitely need you back.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you. Thanks everyone. Thanks,
Thanks,
Dash, for
everyone.
sure.
Have a good night and have a
Thanks,
good
Bill.
day, everybody.
Bye for now.